Okay, we're recording. Hi, my name is Danielle Blunt. I am a professional dominatrix based largely out of New York City, and I'm here today with Lucy Sweetkill. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm also a professional dominatrix based out of New York City, but currently in the sunny Palm Springs area, escaping.
Rub it in.
I had to find an escape. It was just getting too much.
Yeah, lots more space out there too.
Yeah, a lot more space. It's been fun throwing like my whips. I brought my whips with me, so just doing like outdoor whipping.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, I love outdoor whipping. Even in New York City, I would bring my whips to the park and do like whipniks, picnic whipniks, and throwing my whips in the park always brought some interesting people around.
Oh, totally. I think I went to one of those, so it was super fun.
Yeah, you were there. That was very fun. Yeah, so we're both largely, I feel like both of our practice is very much about these in-person connections and being able to attune with a submissive in person and really like pushing and growing with submissives in ongoing types of play. And so I've just been curious to chat with other people who are shifting to like largely online and virtual work, what it's been like trying to take some of that aspects and translating it to online play and the content that you're making, as well as in like the dynamics that you've been maintaining with submissives throughout the pandemic.
Oh man, it's been very interesting. And I think a lot of us who have been talking to each other, a lot of learning lessons, a lot of learning and growing, especially because, yeah, like I love online, like I love in-person play so much, like that energy, everything about it. You know, the smell, the feel, the touch, everything, all my senses are being activated when I'm doing in-person play. And so that cuts out so much of it when you're doing online. And that has been a mind fuck in a lot of ways. So I would say there are a few different categories, right? So if we take current subs, current clients, current, whichever, those who have an understanding of our interaction, those are a little bit more easy to sustain because you can kind of tap into your memories of play and what it is, and it can build up for future play, like you have something to remember and taste, right? In your mind that you can tap into and be like, oh my God, we could do this and do this. And, remember that one time we did this and maybe, and so it's a really good, the online stuff like texting, video calls, phone calls, I guess in a lot of ways could be good foreplay.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it as like extended foreplay, like the pandemic is our bondage and like we're working with what we have and like just like this perpetual, seemingly never ending tease.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we're just in a big chastity device.
Yeah. Big virtual chastity device. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it has been a little bit easier to maintain those relationships because we've already created that bond and we can we're in it together trying to get to the place we want to get, which is when we can play in person again. And so those are really easy to sustain because, there are things like Sex Panther for texting, photos, videos, assignments. So those kind of ongoing interactions create like a bond, whether, for some subs, we have a schedule of when we text on Sex Panther, whether it's on Goddess Worship Day, which is Sunday, or Hump Day, which is Wednesday, we have little assignments for some days. And then there are other subs that, you know, message me every day. And we just kind of check in and connect as humans, especially for those who are quarantining by themselves. Like, how are you doing? What are you going to do for the day? Are you going to do anything kinky? Are you going to do anything fun? And then sometimes some interactive, like kinky things to do for the day. Or have you fantasized about anything? Sometimes my subs will tell me about a BDSM dream they had, and then we'll be like, oh, what do you have? You know, that maybe we can like play these things out, right? And so trying to have a little more interaction for solo play, especially for those who are quarantining by themselves. And then of course, for those who have partnerships or maybe roommates or where they don't have much privacy, I think it's just kind of nice to be able to have an outlet through Sex Panther or Night Flirt or whichever, where they can at least talk about some of their like pent up kinks that are coming up, going down like memory lane for some of them. I'd been talking to one sub about, you know, he was moving actually during this time, and he came across all these like pairs of panties he had forgotten he had bought or had. And then we talked about how the first time he got into panties, and it was just kind of, he was like, oh, it was so nice to go kind of down memory lane and talk
Like a
about
nostalgic
this.
approach to kink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some people don't have anyone to talk to about that even more, right? Because they're not either having their sessions or they're not like maybe going to community events. And so it's a really great way of just like being able to send a text and talk about these things without revealing too much, or putting yourself in a situation where, you know, if other people don't know in your life, you're going to get caught or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are a little bit easier. And then the other kind of category is for those who, you know, who are like brand new, who, you know, they're like, you know, because there's always new people every day kind of making that decision to say, I'm finally going to see a dominatrix. I'm doing it, right? Like,
I wonder how many people a day, what the like statistics are on how many people a day decide today is the day, I'm going to do it. I'm going to see a dominatrix.
Because we've all gotten those emails, right? We've all gotten that like, so I've been looking at your stuff for so long, and I decided today I'm gonna, you know, I want to schedule an appointment.
I've had this draft of your contact inquiry in my Google Docs for 3 months, and I decided I can't not send it any longer.
Yeah, like we've all gotten these emails at some point. So with so many of us, right? And now how many months have gone by? How many people a day are like finally making that decision, right? And now they don't have that option. So now they're thinking about it, but they have no outlet for it. And so I'm getting a lot of people who are, I'm totally new. I've come across this. I think in general, porn has gone up. So people are viewing more porn, which maybe means they are sort of accidentally coming on to other kinky things through porn, because we hear that all the time, right? They go through a porn hole, just like a Wikipedia hole. And then all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I'm on this.
Oh, what about feet?
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people are on porn right now. They're online. And so I think they're maybe coming across things a little bit quicker, and then, okay, let me just look into it. And then knowing that they don't actually have to book anything, they're starting to discover like maybe there's some other ways.
That's what I've noticed too, that it seems like right now there's a lower threshold to entry for people who are new to kink. And what I've been finding in my practice and like translating like submissive training to online work is that I found that submissive training works really well in like to be able to translate online, because what I've been doing is like meeting with people like once a week or twice a week, and we set aside time, having people keep submissive training journals for me and going through like what protocols work for us, what tasks work for us, like what makes you feel connected when we're not there, so that this still feels like an act of service to your dominant. But what I found is that a lot of the people that I've been doing this training with who weren't like pre-existing clients or submissives, I don't know if they would have booked me immediately for a session. And I think that there's something that feels slightly less threatening than like stepping physically into someone's dungeon space than it does to like book like a Skype call or text someone on Sex Panther or like sign up and follow someone's OnlyFans and like continue to see the type of things that you might see in a session or that you might see in the type of porn that you like. And
Yeah.
that I've just been finding a lot more like people between the ages of like 21 and 35 have been contacting me. A lot of people who haven't explored kink, and definitely a lot of people who are quarantining alone. It like I think people are really craving intimacy right now in any form. And I think even in my like in-person play, a lot of it's about intimacy and like being able to like tolerate and explore intimacy with another person. And I think that that's the part of online work that really works well for me, like especially the like one-on-one
Yeah.
times and spaces. And it's also why I like doing this interview series because I like get to sit and talk to someone one-on-one, which especially if you're quarantining alone isn't like you're often part of these like very large Zoom calls and or there's like so many different things you could be doing, doom scrolling on social media, but those
Yeah.
like one-on-one interactions feel like really nice.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry right now is much lower, right? And the distractions are much lower.
Yeah.
And the access is much higher now because I think all people are doing is consuming content of some kind, whether they're online looking at stuff, whether they're consuming porn, media, right? And they're also kind of not distracted by other instant gratification things like going out, hanging out with friends, going to the bars, going to a restaurant, going to the movies. So all these other things that are pulling people's attention to maybe trying to figure out some of their own shit, they don't really have anymore. So they kind of have to sit in their stuff. And when you sit in your things, your mind starts to go, right? And then it
You
starts
can't
to,
deny these things that you like know to be true about yourself and like that you're interested in, that when you have all of these distractions, you can just be like,
yeah.
oh, that's not a priority for me right now. Or like, that's what I'm going to think about when I'm
Yeah.
jerking off, but never again.
Yeah. And so like there's less of all those other distractions and it's all like closed in. The only outlet to the outside world for most people are through their computers or their phones, right? And so now they're searching and it's all in semi-secret, right? So now the things you do in secret, now you get to do that for many more hours and days. And so then I think it leads to people finding all these other things that maybe they didn't have the time and energy to look for before
Right.
and didn't realize were available. And
Yeah, I think
yeah,
there's something too about like for people, especially for like kink curious people who are quarantining alone. I feel like the people who have been contacting me like have had other partners who aren't necessarily kinky or like would be casually dating and like looking for something that they want. And I think sometimes people settle for relationships that meet some of their needs and they're able to be like, okay, this like kink need that's not being met is fine, like I can explore that on my own, I can like hire a professional to see that. And I think what I've noticed with a lot of people contacting me is like it's not, especially like people who are quarantined with partners who aren't kinky, who like maybe it's a good relationship, maybe it's not a great relationship, maybe it's good in some ways and some things are lacking that they typically outsource for. But I think a lot of people who have been contacting me are kind of realizing like kink is a really important part of my life. It is at the root of how I like feel intimate with others, and DS relationships and DS dynamics are something that I kind of want to put more energy into and want them to be more integrated into like how I cultivate relationships in the future.
yeah, I've definitely noticed that too, because it's an evaluation period. I saw 2020 as a really big time to reevaluate a lot of stuff. That's why so many people broke up. So, you know, it either made or broke your relationship for a lot of people who are in partnerships, because they're trying to figure out all those other things. Like, you aren't able to outsource a lot of your stuff, like hang out with your friends, right? You're hanging out with this one person. Is your relationship so solid that you could be with this person for this long period of time? The outsourcing of kink or all these other things, right? Could you no longer can ignore that some of this stuff is not part of your relationship, and it's going to come up. And I see kink as a sexual identity, and those things can't be as easily ignored anymore, because, you know, there's limitations to everything right now, right?
Right. Or hidden. I know, like,
Oh.
I was talking to,
Yeah, you cannot hide it.
I was talking to someone and we were doing like a virtual session consultation, just talking about kink, and he's sitting in his car in a cul-de-sac because he has like a wife and kids who aren't like, don't need to know about it, or like he doesn't feel comfortable sharing that with them, or it's not part of his relationship with his wife. And like he's sitting there in like this very like covert posture, and like I feel like it's just like this very interesting dynamic that like can like at sometimes like exacerbate shame, but also then when you have the outlet for it to like talk through it can be like very cathartic. And I just remember he's like sitting in the car in his cul-de-sac and he's like, oh my God, it is just so nice to talk to someone about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is people are realizing that they want to talk about it. And I think that's the one good thing about, because kind of the barrier to entry to kink seems lower right now. There's less distractions, so people can kind of really hone in and think about this a little more. Something that maybe shame is what kept them to be like, oh,
Right.
I'm going to push that in the back of my mind, right? And not deal with it, and then focus on all these other distractions. You don't have as many of those. I also think that it is really good for kind of new people to start this way in a lot of ways, because just like the same thing I see for dating, it sort of forces you to move away from instant gratification, which is like swipe, ooh, they're hot, let me go meet them, boom, let me have sex. You know, you're kind of forced to have these Zoom dates, phone dates, you know, like,
it's that idea of like
Yeah.
bondage or restraint or constraint that's now being placed on all of our social interactions, as well as like the necessity of communication and like really deciding like, is this date that I might go on worth then having to quarantine for 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Is like it's like like in person, like meeting new people has just like a much higher risk factor right now, that I feel like people are hopefully like taking it more seriously of what that means. And then I also think that it means that if your needs aren't being met in that situation, it like necessitates a reevaluation.
Oh, totally. I think it's a lot of people, you know, it's slowing a lot of things down, which I think is actually really good, because I think we do as a society have an issue with instant gratification and a very low attention span, right? We're very much like, I want it now, I want to feel it good now, I want to do the thing now, 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 now. And this really slows it down, which is kind of a concept, a big concept in BDSM, right? Don't focus on the orgasm, focus on, you know, the journey and all of that. And let's talk about communication and consent. And this is so much of that, right? Which is communication, consent. Like, okay, like what have you been doing to take your COVID precautions? What have I been doing? Have you gotten tested? What does that look like? I want to connect with this person enough to make sure that if I do take this risk, that it's going to be worth the risk. And so I think it's a really good time to reevaluate the things you value in your life and what you want in your life. because why not, right? Like all the things we sometimes do that we don't necessarily want to do or we don't even think about, just because it's easy, just because it's in the moment. And this kind of gives a little more time for reflection and reevaluation.
Yeah, and I like what you said about like that being part of BDSM dynamics. Like it's not like heteronormative sex is very focused on an orgasm, like a male orgasm is the ending point and it's done. And this idea of like taking your time, like the tease and the denial being part of getting to know and like establish new dynamics, I think is really interesting. And I've been having like a lot of fun with that in virtual training. I have a few people who I'm working with on virtual submissive training as a way to sort of like keep kink alive in the pandemic. But what it's really done has been like really mindful communication that's been based largely in interpersonal dynamics and figuring out like what works for each of us as individuals and like where we can find space to meet in the middle for like healthy and sustainable dynamics, as well as like creating all of this space to like dream up incredible post-pandemic scenes together and sort of like enjoy that intimacy, that closeness of like regular communication and regular fantasizing and creating that space into your schedule at like a regular interval to feed your like erotic self.
Yeah. I mean, it's been really interesting because I think without this, you know, because so much stuff moved online and with a lot of even with my current clients, right, to stay connected, we started setting up weekly calls, you know, every 2 week calls, whichever, stuff like that, interactions. It's been interesting because I think it helped one of my clients discover that his idea of submission was not what his idea of submission was very much based in this fantasy idea. It really was more about, you know, he only wants to be sexually submissive, right? He doesn't actually, and in that sense, meaning he wants someone to sort of control everything that has to do with like sex, right? So it has to be erotically tied in.
He's not so much into like service submission.
Yeah, which is a very different idea of submission for me. Like
Right.
for me, sexual submission is such a small part. And it's something that a lot of male, you know, identified folks want to feel, but not necessarily understand that. Like, I think a lot of doms and women see it more holistically as a bigger sense of everything. And like, I'm okay with erotic submission.
Even chastity
Yeah.
is so wrapped up in the male orgasm. Like even when you're denying the orgasm, it's still so wrapped
That's erotic submission.
Yeah. And I have a confession to make. I got really bored last night and was swiping around on Tinder and matched with this person whose name was Cuck. And I just decided to play the like oblivious girl who knows nothing about kink. And I was like, oh my God, what a cute name. Is that a family name? And he's like, no, actually, it's short for cuckold. I was like, oh, interesting. I'm like, what is that? And he's like explaining it to me in this way that's like very based on like the male needs. And I asked him another question and I was like, oh, like, and like, how does that benefit the woman in the relationship? And he's like, well, like she could control my orgasm. She wouldn't let me come. She could fuck other people and like, blah, and all these things. And I'm like, wow. I was like, that's so interesting. Like, I asked how it would benefit me and you didn't even ask like what I was interested in. And here you have all these assumptions of what I would like. And it was just very fun for me to like, to activate my little like fake non-knowledgeable status. And he's like, I guess I have some things to think about. I was like,
and it's very true. It's very true that like the act, you know, like I try to get a lot of my clients and subs to understand that difference, right? If your submission is so tied to your orgasm or lack of orgasm, which is still based on your orgasm, your sexual interest, if your submission is just around your sexual submission, erotic submission, yes, that's a form, but it's not everything, and it's still very self-centered based, right?
Which, like, that's fine.
That's
like,
fine.
it's frustrating for me when people like use all of this other language around submission. Like, I'm yours, I belong to you.
Yeah,
Like, I'm your submissive. You can do whatever you want to me as my
but it's
dominant.
not
And
true.
they're like, but really, like, all I want to do is to be able to come under these set of circumstances or not come under
Yes,
these. And like, that's totally fine and that's valid. I just appreciate when people are like, I'm into like sexual submission and orgasm control. And like, I'm not like,
that's
yeah.
yeah.
And like, but also like, I think that DS dynamics and DS relationships are can be so fulfilling and like so life-changing that like for me, that's just like such a small part of it. It sounds like we're very alike in that idea that like, this is like sexual submission is only interesting to me in the grander scheme of general submission, which is
Yeah.
I have a submissive who is like really into cuckolding and orgasm control, but also they're incredibly service oriented. And so like when that person is doing service for me, that feels erotically charged for me. Like when this person is doing my dishes or when this person is like working behind the scenes on my website for me and thanks me afterwards for giving them like the opportunity to serve me, that's what I find like erotically charging in a similar way that like the orgasm control does, but it's like
Yeah.
it's like the two sort of like fuel each other for me.
Yeah, for me, like, that's okay if people, it's just sexual submission for them. I don't like when they start using all these other words, right? As if it's this other thing when it's really not. It's very focused on this, there, and in that context, then my services as a pro dom, fine. You pay me for my service to control that aspect of you.
For a set period of time.
Yes, set period of time in this fantasy, exchange that we have, right? But for me, true DS for me is not just that. I take no pleasure in that. There is no reward for me in that. There's none. Like, if you think about it, what reward do I get? Because I control your orgasm? Who gives a fuck? What does that give me? That gives me nothing.
Or the people who then come and don't feel submissive after at all. I'm like,
yeah,
as long as it's presented as what it is, as like an exchange of like labor for fantasy and money, like
yes,
that's great. That's an exchange that works for me. But
yeah,
I always am it's just like not who I normally have in my life and personal DS relationships where
yeah.
it's like more not always 24/7, but just like our way of relating is through DS dynamics.
Yeah, and so it's been like through this kind of going online, through these video calls, phone calls, like he realized that like he kept using all these words that I kept saying, like, this is not like, you keep saying you want to serve me and do anything, but no, you don't, because if it's
Like I want
not
you to go to
tied
the
in,
bank.
yeah, yeah, like if it's not tied into this, you get upset. And so this is what I've been trying to reveal to you over the last 2 years. But over the last 2 years, he was so distracted, 3 years, he was so distracted by our play together and feeling my dominance within our play that he, even though I would tell him, like, your submission is not the type of submission I want. So you wanting to be my slave is not going to work, right? Because you don't understand that, like, your idea of submission is sexual submission. You only want it if I control your orgasm. That is not a true submissive to me. That's fine within our having our appointment, have fun at our appointment type of thing,
right?
But like, don't
it's
try to think
role play.
Yeah, don't think that like being under my training and blah blah blah, and that you want to like really become my slave. You need to understand what that difference is, because and one of the most revealing thing was, we had a weekly call, And this is when it really finally sank into him, after I would talk about this all the time, because we would have these issues because he just could not understand those differences. It finally hit him after, like, not that long ago. We've been having these weekly calls since the pandemic and all this stuff. Finally hit him when we had our weekly call. I was having a bad day, and I was letting him know about my bad day, and it took up our hour, right? It's a paid call, but he wants to work to be trained to be my sub, right? And it took up most of the day, most of the hour. And we didn't really talk about like his, you know, his fantasies or anything like that. And then we got off, and he was super upset. And then it finally hit, and instead of like losing his shit out on me, which, you know, was under my training, has learned not to do, he was like, Mistress, can I take some time to kind of process some things after our call, some thoughts, some feelings I had? And I was like, yes, you may. And so that was actually growth over, you know, our training. And then he reached out and was like, you know, you're right. If it's not tied into my orgasm and eroticism and my sex and all of that, and my sexuality only, I don't want it. I realized I get upset by it. And I was like, yes. So now you're realizing that you don't actually want to be my submissive. You only want to be erotically submissive to me when it benefits you, right? And that is totally fine. So if you want to schedule phone calls with me for that exact thing, for that service, we can do that. But let's not pretend that you actually want to be my submissive and you actually want to be trained by me and that you will actually do whatever I say. Because if you were, you would be that person on the phone just being happy that you could hear and be there for me, and you weren't.
And I think it's always instances, I've had similar experiences. It's always instances where you kind of like step off of this pedestal that they've put you on. Like, I always think it's someone else putting you on a pedestal and they're like preconceived notions about you. And it's like when you like try and step off and be like, oh, like this is like my need or what I'm interested in this scenario, or like I'm having a bad day, or you know what, I'm human and I have the flu and like I need to reschedule, or just like sit there and like feel shitty and get support. And it's always those instances where the fantasy of the dom suddenly gets like ricocheted back into like her human form, which she was always in, that something like that happens. But it sounds really great that you were able to come to that understanding. I had a somewhat similar experience in the beginning of the pandemic. I was training someone who like very much said that they wanted to be my submissive, and I would ask him to come up with lists of ways that he could serve me, which is something that I often do for submissives. And
me too.
And if it's exclusively a list of, I can give you my orgasm, I can go down on you, I can clean cum out of you, I can like, I can do all of these things, I can rub your naked body, I can, and I'm just like, hot. All those things sound hot in some contexts, but none of that is in service to me. If it was, I would be the one telling you to. And then on the other hand, I have people being like, I'm an SEO expert. I could help you with your website. Like, I have X, Y, and Z skills and can like do this for you. I like can teach you this video editing software, or just like things that like I like thinking about who I am, what I do, and things that they have to actually offer me. Or like I'm well resourced and can provide you with money. And I had this experience with one submissive over quarantine where he was insisting he was interested in being like owned and trained as my submissive, and he wanted to be my favorite submissive. Like, he didn't just want to be my submissive, he wanted to be my favorite submissive. And I really enjoyed this guy's energy, but it was very clear to me that it was largely based in his erotic desires and his erotic like foot fetish fantasies. And it really, I asked him to both for his wife and for me to come up with 3 different gifts. Like one was that was exclusively for the woman, one
Yeah.
that was exclusively for him, and one that was something that they could both enjoy together for both me and his wife. And he was completely unable to come up with the one that was just for the woman. And it was, we were like having conversations about this and the pandemic, and we were talking about like things that were useful to me. And I'm like, well, like having these regular calls is great for me. Like my income has taken a hit, and like having like contributions towards my rent, like contributing to mutual aid efforts are all things that you can do to serve me. And he wound up, after I posed this question to him, he wound up buying me a pair of boots that were the same price as my rent. And I was like, thank you for the boots. But like, this is not what we were talking about. Like,
Yeah.
this is a gift for you. Like, I could sell the boots and pay my rent, sure. But it's just when people, and like, I think it's also like a privilege of being at a point in our career where we can like have those really honest conversations with people and like risk them deciding not to see us any longer. And we decided, he was like, you know what, like, I think like this has been like absorbing a lot of my energy, and I think like I need to take some space as well. And I was like, okay, great. And like we like reached back out, and I was like, I would be more than happy to have a session with you once it feels safe to do so again, or more than happy to like talk to you about your fantasies.
Yeah.
Like in a more constrained space. It's just like it sounds very similar to this experience where it's like, this is not what you were saying it was. And like, if I had been set up for success of him being like, all I want to do is talk about foot fetish and service in an eroticized way, I feel like I would have been better able to provide that service rather than putting in more energy, thinking it was like a more intimate DS relationship.
Yeah, I agree. Like I spend a lot of time, and I think, you know, I agree with the fact that we're kind of in a place in our career where we can have these honest conversations. I have these conversations with every single one of my clients, actually. It is a conversation that I say benefits them, because you're going to figure out more about what you want and be able to ask for what you want. So a lot of my clients, I teach them the difference between these things. You want to role play submission and being my slave and blah, 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 and you sleep in the cage under my bed. We can fucking do that. I love doing that. I love doing the role play, and I love doing the submission within that context, within that box, right? We can do that. You want to book a call where we're doing a session over video, we can do that. Right. But don't come at me saying that you want to be trained, that you want to do this whole other thing, because I will let you know what that reality looks like. You know, the reality is, you know, the subs who've been my personal DS slaves, you know, one of them being Pain Puppy, that a lot of people know. You know what he does? He doesn't get all the fun and games that everybody thinks he does. He does get a lot of them. He gets that access. It's kind of a reward for, you know, submitting to me and, you know, being my submissive. But half the shit he does, like he went to my apartment the other day to wait for an hour because I have a gated door, right? Wait to try to get into the front gate just so that he could slip something in the mailbox to let the mail person know that I still live there and please, like, to keep my mail. He waited an hour on 2 or 3 different day occasions, because one day he waited an hour and no one was coming in and out, so he just couldn't get in. And then he came back another day.
That's so romantic.
Yeah, and that's submission, right? Because I'm like, I need you to go let the mail person know that I'm still here. Please keep my mail. And, you know, he's done that. Or the fact where I'm like, hey, can you, you know, one time, you know, I was traveling and my friend was staying at my apartment and there was no toilet paper. and I totally forgot. And I said, hey, can you go get some toilet paper and go meet her, let her in? Because he also was giving her the key. I was like, I'll go let her in, give her the key and make sure to have toilet paper because I forgot to buy toilet paper. And he did exactly that. That's service, right?
And there's this enjoyment of it for like in an ideal form, which I like no pain puppy. So like, it's like when people do service for me, they thank me after. And for things like that, like I've been in DS relationships where like part of their submission and their service to me was like going to the post office and the pharmacy for me. I didn't wait in like a bureaucratic line that I didn't have to for 3 years. That is a beautiful act of like love and submission. And like I've been in like DS dynamics where actual service is making my life easier, more enjoyable. And for the person who's doing the service for me, it's also doing like it has a symbiotic relationship for them where they're getting something out of it. Like I don't want service from someone who's not interested in giving service to me. It like doesn't land well for me either.
Yeah, because if somebody's just like, oh, fine, da da da, like that's a shitty thing too. You don't want that. Like, I know that, like, yes, if it came down to it, does Pups necessarily want to wait outside of my apartment for an hour? No, but he does it because he knows it helps me. And he also, like, has a good attitude about it because he understands that that's like whatever I need he will do because he understands how much I give him. He understands that, like, that dynamic as well, because he has a very truly submissive mind. He's not necessarily a service sub, you know, but he has a submissive mind and lens to everything where like to him that still it is important to make me happy more than anything, you know. And when he chooses to service someone, you know, it's like important to make, you know, me happy. And so I'm very honest with a lot of clients because I get a lot of people who understand that I do train a lot of subs. I do take this time right now where I'm like, okay, you want to be under my training? There's a few people right now where I'm like, this is what it looks like, whether it's for me or not. Like right now, I'm actually training a few people for their wives, for their female-led relationship. They are, you know, on weekly calls with me talking about what did they do for, you know, how were they with their wives, keeping journals about, you know, one assignment I gave one of them, which is anytime your wife has to ask you to do something, I want you to note that for the week. I want you to note it so that you see areas that you can improve, right? Like if she asks you to fill her wine glass, that is something you should have seen. And like they're very thankful because it's refining their ability to serve and submit in the type of relationship they want. They have female-led relationships with women who are not actually aware of, who are not trained in this area, right? But are starting to kind of open and enjoy their male partners or their female partners actually who want to learn how to, you know, serve better. And so they're asking me to, you know, advise them in that.
And it's interesting too how gendered it is. I feel like the service that male submissives do for women is oftentimes like invisibilized labor of women. And I think pointing that out to them as well has been fun for me. I also have some people who send their partners to me for husband training, if you will. And so it's interesting to have them both being like sent to me by the wife and also like, I think like a lot of the people who see me for training, like take a more submissive role in their relationship anyways, whether or not it's like talked about. So there are certain things that like the wife seems to be enjoying about having a more submissive partner, whether or not like she knows exactly the language of BDSM and DS dynamics around that. And I was training someone as well to be like thinking about like with the gift example that I was talking about. It's like, what is the gift that just your wife would enjoy?
Yeah.
And this person had such a hard time coming up with it because he really couldn't understand the difference between service submission and sexual submission. He's like,
Yeah.
I'll give her my orgasm.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Because we get this all the time, and it's kind of having to re-educate to re-educate men specifically to be less self-centered, because I think a lot of women are socially already taught to think about others. I'm not saying obviously this is a blanket statement for both, any gender, to be honest, but there is a majority where it's very focused on them, what they want, their orgasm, all those things. And so they don't necessarily see all these other stuff that they need a little help in. And in general, I think it just helps the world, right? To try to think of other people outside of your own stuff. And if you want your own stuff, that's totally valid, but you need to be honest about that and clear, like, this time, I'm scheduling this because this is the thing I want. That's totally cool.
Right.
Just stop using these words as if like, I want to serve you. And then you go, okay, well, how do you want to serve me? Oh, well, you can kick my balls as many times as you want. I'm like, what does that do for me? Like, and it's like, if you go, oh, I would love to have a session where you kick my balls because I enjoy it. Cool. Let's do that.
It's so different. And I also think with like the husband training or training of partners too, I feel like it's a path of like, depending on where they're at, but of being like, checking in with like, are you even doing, you want to be in a female supremacy type relationship? Are you even doing an equitable amount of labor in the beginning? Like contribute to the household and the relationship that you're in? Like, do you do the laundry? Do you clean? Like how, or like who is doing this labor? And I think that so much of it just sort of happens outside of like what men want to see, and they still want this fantasy of like female supremacy, female-led relationship, without actually taking the steps to like first make their like relationship equitable in a way that like patriarchy and capitalism might make it like the norm not be equitable, and then like go beyond that. Like a husband doing the laundry for a family or for his partner isn't necessarily femdom. That's kind of just being like a good equitable partner.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, and I think you see that even with parenting, right?
Yeah.
Like I rewatched what's her name? God, the Asian comedian. I'm totally thinking she's like pregnant. Ali Wong. I rewatched her first one, and she was like, "This is bullshit. Like a man goes to one doctor's appointment. He's such a good husband." She was like, "You know who has to be there? Me, all the time, all the doctor's appointments. I'm the star of the show." And I was like, and it's so true, right? Like the very little that a man needs to do to be like, oh my God, he's so great. And then all the shit that women have to do, and kind of teaching that even in
not
BDSM
even be great,
world,
but to like
be basics.
Still be criticized.
Yeah. And so I think in BDSM, we see that, we just see it in this other realm because it's also coded in fantasy for so many people, where they're like, the femdom fantasy, I want you to control everything. No, you actually only want me to control your orgasm. That's the only thing you truly want me to control. Because if I asked you to do all these other things, to read these books, to listen to these podcasts, to grow as a person, to donate to these places, to change your eating habits, to exercise, to do all that you don't actually want to do that.
To change literally every way that you interact with other people, with yourself, with your body, and with me, so that it's in service to to community, to like the relationship that we're cultivating together. It's very few and far between who are into that. And I think it is like a matter of helping people find the language of the container that they actually want, which is I think of like the container of a session as a boundary as well. And like being able to like competently talk about what your boundaries are is really important. And I think it does get into like this like grayish area when people are using language of like long-term submission, especially like both of you are like kinky in our personal lives to some extent.
Yeah.
And like I think having people use the language of like a lifestyle submissive or like your personal property, when we also have experiences of people who actually want that and who are
Yeah.
we're like cultivating those relationships with,
Yeah.
I think it is a matter of like helping people find the language around erotic submission and being able to like effectively communicate that to someone, in a way where they're both like not leading someone astray and like able to get what they want.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a big part of our job we end up having to do. But also part of it is I like to take the, wrap the vegetable in cheese kind of analogy of like, I am always sort of trying to, teach some like good behaviors with some of my clients who are clearly not looking for that other part, but I kind of wrap it nicely within like, oh, here, your erotic submission, which you really, really want, right? And then I'd be like, well, if you're going to eat that, you're going to also have to take in like, it'd be really good if you thought about these things too. So, and so I feel like I definitely try to weave, some of these other things that they may not think about.
And it's hard not to too, especially like if you're having ongoing relationships with people and it's like you are like literally on your knees worshiping me in a session and you're going to treat women in your personal life like shit, like that doesn't fly for me. And like there are times when they're talking about their personal relationships and like they're not like in alignment with like where they should be. It gets pointed out. And I do love the idea of like, you want this foot, you want this candy. Well, also you're gonna have to treat women with respect.
Or politics, right? Where I'm just like, oh, da da da. But you do know that if you don't vote in da 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 da, this is what happens. Have I, and I feel like I definitely weave a lot of these things in to get, because a lot of these relationships we have, even if it's not like a personal lifestyle DS, like we have a lot of clients we've known for so long, right? Ongoing relationships. And I love having these deep conversations with them to just kind of open up their eyes to like the reality of like the world, whether it has to do with sex work politics, whether that has to do with race, like I'm back at my old house days, the Asian fetish thing was hard, big, hard. And I would take that opportunity when they would use words like Oriental or like, oh, I definitely have an Asian fetish. I would kind of take that opportunity to kind of educate them a little within the context of kink and BDSM, because they wouldn't see these things. They wouldn't notice these things. I remember when one of my really, really good, clients, when he first voted, when Trump first was on the ballot and he voted for Trump, like we did a hard, heavy caning scene after that, where I was just like, what are you thinking? I was like, you've known me for so long. You've known all this stuff for so long, blah, blah, blah. And we talked about it. And while he was getting cane, and I was just like, this is what happens. Like, do you see, like, I understand you thought about the money aspect, but money is not the only thing that you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about all these things you care about. And it was just like a huge caning scene to talk about his behavior,
I know so many doms who did, and people who were coming to doms specifically to be like, I voted for Trump, punish me.
Yeah. And just trying to like give them a more social lens, because I hear a lot of people like, oh, well, I voted this way or I did this thing politically because, it's better for business, it's better for money, right?
Yeah.
And it's the focus of me and money. And I'm like, well, you know what? Money is not the only thing that should be concerned about. Like, I get that you voted because of money, but you should ask yourself deep inside of your soul, should that be the only thing that matters? Because we could take other stances just about money that would be really fucking horrible, And then I'm like, maybe sometimes you sacrifice money for a bigger, greater cause. Like, do you think that's something that is actually like would be good? Like, how about if, they said for money reason, you should be allowed to like kill anybody, or maybe for money reasons, blah, blah, blah. Like, here are these things that go on.
Right. Here are like the illogical fallacies that you've created in your head to confirm whatever's best for you personally in the moment.
Yeah, to justify. And I was like, that argument doesn't work for me when you're just like, well, I did it because of money. I'm like, you wouldn't feel good if someone decided to kill you because they did it for money. Like, that doesn't work either, but you're using the same type of logic, right? Like, sometimes we have to look at maybe money is not the only driving factor, like maybe let's look at our other values that we should look at instead of money. And so I feel like I use my position to wrap that in.
Yeah, I do that to some extent as well. I remember having a conversation with a Jewish client, and I'm Jewish as well, about the way that they were voting. He basically was texting me on Sex Panther being like, well, you wouldn't like my politics. And I was like, do you want to tell me what I wouldn't like, or like, do you want to be punished for something? Like, where are we going? And we wound up talking about like tax rates and like higher tax rates for richer people as a form of tzedakah, of like giving back to communities. Like, I never thought about it like that. And like all of the things that we're talking about like in this conversation, I feel like is like reframing things for people so they're not at the epicenter of like whatever decision is being made, and so that they have like the language around to communicate more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's, I think language right now in communication is so huge, because unfortunately we have such like, language is so nuanced and has such different meaning for different people. And one word can sound very triggering for one person and less triggering for another, like even within our world, right? Like a lot of us have embraced the word pervert, right? We're just like, we're total perverts. But if you say that word pervert in a different context, in not a context, but within a different group, a lot of times the first thing that comes into their minds are, people who molest children, right? And that's the first thing. And so it's hard for them to wrap their thoughts around that word pervert, when a lot of us, it's just lighthearted, right? A lot of us in BDSM, we kind of use it in this very lighthearted way. We like things that are different, while there are other people who are seeing that word and they are seeing like
the pathological nature of how like diverse sexualities or perverse sexualities have been coupled together in a psychological and like legal standard as the same as both criminal activity and like the harm of minors. And I think it's like there's power to reclaiming a word and also like understanding why other people might not be into it. But I want to start wrapping up the conversation now, but I didn't know if there was anything else that you would be interested in wrapping up with.
Well, we did talk about, kind of what are some fantasy scenes that we've, conjured up during this time, For me, I would say, I've been missing, I'm a sadist. I miss giving pain for my pain sluts, for those who have learned that pain can be very transformative. It can be also such a great sense of relief and release for. I have a lot of subs who use, for them, getting a hard, ass beating is just, it just forces them to get out of their head and just let go. It's like what they need to like let all it out, right? And then there are those who just love it and enjoy it, Shine, Shine Girl being one of them.
Shine.
And so I miss the power of pain. I miss the power of like using my whips, my paddles, my canes, all of that, because I am a sadist. I do enjoy it. I love the sound. I love like, the feel, the marks, all of it. And I haven't been getting to do much of that. And unfortunately, my partner, who is not someone who enjoys too much pain, has been bearing the burden of like, of love, of like physical love, like more of like biting, which he still doesn't like, he doesn't like the extent, like his numbers with biting pain is like, he can go up to maybe like a 5 or 6, right? Of what I'm able to do,
and want to do.
Yeah. I want to go more to like a 8 or 9. So sometimes I play on that line of what he is willing to take and capable of taking, to sometimes a little more. And it's been a little rough on that part where he's just like, I think you really bruised me, and he'll get really upset. He'll get over it because he knows that like, I do the lighter side, but really the side I want to go on a lot is between that like 7, 8, 9, and he's sort of like at a 6 is his highest. So
yeah, I definitely miss hurting people. Is like, I'm just like, give me flesh between my teeth, my fingers, a body underneath my feet, like a cock under my foot. Like, I just like, there's so much about it. Or like, I also really love foot worship scenes. And just like, I haven't had that in a really long time. And then I've also been noticing that the pandemic has been making me fetishize latex in a way that I've never really experienced. I don't consider myself a latex fetishist, but I really want to like have like submissives in front of me in like heavy latex, like completely objectified in like vac beds where like we're just like the only thing keeping us apart is this like millimeter of black latex. So I'm like very much fetishizing the difference, and I am hoping that I'll have some new latex goodies and latex sluts to play with post-pandemic so I can enact some of those fantasies.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about tickling a lot too, because I just love bondage and tickling. And I like came across a bunch of my old tickling, videos that I've taken with some subs, and I'm just like, just having someone tied up and tickling them. And so they're just begging and begging. And in a way, obviously it's very sadistic.
Seeing someone's like response in real time to something that you're putting out there, and like that ability to like attune and meet someone and sort of like play and find this like flowy state of reciprocity is something that I also like. I found to some extent I can translate to like online scenes. And I had like a really hot virtual boot fetish scene, which really worked because like he was a hardcore boot fetishist. So like I could very much like see and hear his arousal, and a very visual fetish for him. So that was very fun for me. And I haven't done too many like online fetish sessions, but I definitely am interested in seeing how they translate into like the more virtual realm.
Yeah, I do miss the real-time reactions. I think that's a
Uh,
big thing. A lot of like that real-time reaction. It goes beyond just like seeing and hearing, right? Like you just can feel it. It's so tangible. It's in the air. It's pheromonal. Like all this stuff is happening, and like a little bit. I've been enjoying actually texting, like sexting, or I don't
I
even
think
know
it's so
how do you combine texting with domination? Those words,
Drama
sexting is
texting.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually been really fun because I can get really creative, and I'll like get in a spin, and like I create like just all these fantasy things of like what could happen. I've always enjoyed that part.
Yeah.
So
I'm also like a very verbal talk. I love like talking through a scene and like so I've taken some of those skills as well as like what I've learned about like from my yoga teacher training and meditation training of being able to like create a scene like visually and like as much as I can somatically so that people
mhm,
can like really enter that space and like be there with me as much as possible given the restraints.
totally. Storytelling,
Yeah. Yeah.
workplace storytelling.
Storytelling, yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It was so good to talk to you. I'm gonna just pause the recording for a sec.